Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
So again, I want to thank you all for joining today's session, and I'm really excited to introduce you to today's presenter and panel moderator, Angela Peacock. Angie is the founder of PDT Global and is now the Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion following its move to LTG and GP Strategies. She spent the past 15 years advising C-suites, governments, and policymakers on how to truly create inclusive environments that drive diversity. And she's joining us today from the UK. So we do have a great session planned. And with that, Angie and team, I'm going to hand it off to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kim. And welcome to everybody. I'm so pleased to be joined by so many of you today. I'm only sorry that we can't get to speak in person, but as Kim said, please do pop your questions into chat. Say hello to each other in chat. What I find with these panels, we tend to have people come along that are pretty much experts, either in the HR field, the learning field, or indeed in the DEI field. So, you know, please do greet each other, say hi, let everybody know where you're from. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Angie Peacock. As you heard, I'm the Director of Global Diversity and Inclusion. But it's probably worth giving you just a little bit of background about my curiosity in this area. And it's actually going to form one of my first questions when I introduce my panel in just a second. My background is over 15 years of really working with C-suites to look at their strategies, to look at what's going right and what's going wrong. In all honesty, I'm quite a cynic. A lot of what I see done in the DE&I world pains me hugely. I'm a big measurement freak, so I love to hear that people are setting themselves targets and achieving them. And I love to hear that we hold people accountable. So when there was a rise in the kind of allyship piece across DE&I, started about 4 years ago, really has come to fruition recently. I got a bit curious. I got a bit curious as to why that was. What the heck did we mean by allyship? So I turned to the people that I trust the most in this field, and that's my phenomenal team, and started asking some questions. As you will gather from my style, I'm quite a cynic. So I was asking questions like, what the hell's different about this than is different about anything else? How does this work with psychologically safe spaces? And, you know, not everybody's going to want to be an ally. So how does this work? I have to say, when you start to dig on this allyship stuff, it's fascinating, it's deep. It is far more than just wearing a lanyard or professing to be, and it's utterly fascinating. So today, I promise you a session that digs in. Please provoke with some of your questions. You've got two sections there. You've got the chat box and you've got the Q&A. I am going to be asking for opinions, so please do answer me when I say, what do you think of this, or what about that? But can you keep your questions in the Q&A? And as your questions come through, if I think it's a great time to answer them at that point, I will put them to my panel. If I think they need to be just held off a little while and maybe answered at the end, then I promise you we will come back to them. You will be very glad to know that it's not me you're going to have to listen to for the next 50 minutes or so, but my phenomenal panel. So it gives me huge amounts of pleasure to introduce to you two very special people. If any of you out there have experienced their work, you will know that there is pretty much nothing they do not know about most of these topics. But if I can introduce to you the wonderful Hannah Shabadine, and can I also introduce to you the wonderful Alistair James Scott. Hello to both of you. Great to have you.
Hi,
Angie.
And just tell everybody, where are you coming in from, Hannah D? Where are you dialing in from today?
So I'm based in Minnesota. We had a snowstorm yesterday. Yay! First snowstorm. How exciting!
Oh my goodness! And Alistair, you're not up in bonny Scotland today, are you? So no snowstorms
no,
for you.
I'm not. No, I'm originally from the Highlands of Scotland, but I live in London in the UK.
So no snowstorms at the moment. We can just do
pretty
grey,
sunny, surprisingly, for London. Yes, it's sunny today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, I know know that both of you are really passionate about this topic. I know you do loads of work in all different areas about this topic. And again, can I say to all of you out there, throw your questions at us, because seriously, there's not a lot that these two wonderful humans cannot answer when it comes to that. But I'm going to kick off. I kind of said in the beginning that, you know, I watch, as both of you know, with great cynicism when I see waves of so-called change coming in DE&I, and always question why. So I guess my first question is, why now? Why on earth? It's at the front of our DEI agenda. I will let you into a little secret. It is our highest selling deliverable in whether it's digital or whether it's face-to-face or whether it's coach. It's the highest selling thing we do at the moment. Tell me why. Like, what is it at the moment that means this is so important?
Shall I go first, Hannah?
Yeah, you go.
Gosh, so well, since the mid-2010s, we have just seen quite a significant rise of the visibility of underserved and unrepresented groups across particularly Western society right now. You can point to the resurgence of movements like #MeToo, BLM, the trans debate within Western Europe and North America, where these identities that have been traditionally silenced or marginalized, well, they're becoming more visible, becoming more emboldened due to social, cultural, and social political events. We've just seen these groups of individuals have a voice, become more recognized, become more understood. And you just have to look to the discourse right now within the world that there's still a need for this. You can point to the unfortunate shootings in Colorado Springs last week. You can point to the debate around LGBTQ plus inclusivity around the World Cup in Qatar right now. And even over here in the UK, overnight, we had an issue with an incident in the royal household where a member of the Queen's staff were asking a charity worker attending a reception who was Afro-Caribbean, where are you from? But where are you really from? And that hit the news overnight last night here. So it is just front and center, and it is core to our debate right now.
So it's kind of raising up and everything's just getting more accessible. We're hearing a lot more. But I think, Hannah, you had a kind of different take on that as well, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DEI work has been booming in recent years, especially after the events that Alistair has mentioned, and many more events that require diversity, equity, and inclusion personnel to step up and engage more with conversations that are deeply personal. And with everything else, anything that is personal requires emotional tax, requires physically taxing a job. So basically, for people to prove their humanity, there needs to be a support system that they can rely on. And that support system could be in the shape of an allyship. People stepping up to take on some of that burden and to alleviate the pain. It's called diversity fatigue. People are exhausted to justify themselves and to prove that they are full humans. This is where allyship comes in.
Yeah, and yeah, it's an interesting take, because again, if I'm going to put my cynical hat on it, it's something that is reigniting again. And it's also something that's practical, right? Because I think we had a lot of people kind of going, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to be. I don't know how to tackle. And for me, both of what you've said kind of, you know, brings that in and sort of drives that forward. But I before I turn to you, I am going to ask the audience. So this is your chance to please answer my question on chat. Before I ask the panel, I'm interested in what you think an ally actually is. Can you give us some words? Can I ask the people out there in webinar land to just turn to their chat and just give me some ideas, please, on what you believe? There's no right or wrong answers on this. I'm looking for a breadth. What is an ally? So thank you, Helen. You've started us off there really well. So Helen's saying, you know, it's very proactive, somebody that's stepping in when they see something wrong. Roberta's using a good word there, intentional. And we've got a supporter, so somebody that is actually supporting, speaking up when they see a wrong, a partner, a defender. I've got authentic partner. So there's some really interesting sort of stuff on there. Oh, hang on, taking on the fight as their own, someone who actively continues learning, a collaborator. Hannity, I know you've got some pretty strong ideas about what an ally should or could be.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, an ally is somebody who does not rely on people of color to invest in themselves and in their growth. This really adds to the fatigue that we introduced in the first question. This is somebody who is invested in building relationships with people who look and think differently than they are. So this is not somebody who would come across and say, so what is that thing on your head, right after they introduce themselves. It's so transactional. People need to start investing in relationship to build that allyship.
Okay, so really that sort of investment, that sort of time. And Alistair, before I go to Alistair, interesting comment here from Ira, using one's privilege to support the less privileged. Oh, and let me just do this one. Allies can speak on someone's behalf when a marginalised group member is not in the room or haven't been invited to the room, which I think is the really powerful one. Alistair, I know you had some stuff to add to that.
Sure. I'm going to build on what Ira just said in the chat feed. I am going to use the big P word, privilege. I know. Cues people who've had some discomfort, I suppose. But for me, privilege, number one, is not something to be uncomfortable around. It's just something to educate that discomfort a bit more. And what I mean by that is having individuals who just better understand the privilege that they have within one relationship or dynamic and how they can better use it. And if we go back to some of the definitions of what an ally really is, one of the definitions is when an ally is somebody who is lifting up, supporting, championing individuals in a group that they themselves are not part of. So it's really, really important that we understand, well, what are the differences between me and them, and what can I do to advance those individuals or that community? So quite practically, it is thinking about, well, what are the spaces that I have access to that others do not? What are the contacts or networks that perhaps I am able to share with those individuals, or where I can just showcase other people? Or what are the barriers that perhaps I have influence over that others do not, that I can dismantle or influence other people to dismantle them as well? So I feel for that, it's about making going back to the intentional comment, being really intentional to think about some of these factors, recognizing where I have the influence and the ability, where the individual, whether it's my Black colleagues, my LGBTQ plus colleagues, my colleagues who are neurodiverse, whatever it might be, and thinking about them in those terms and what my role is to support them in those terms.
You've used the word thinking quite constantly through that sort of last sharing, and again, it is that thinking piece. I mean, we pick up the pieces from some organisations that have launched into allyship work, and it's all gone horribly wrong. And I would put that down to the fact that there just hasn't been, there either hasn't been thinking in the planning of doing it, or allies think, to my point earlier, that you can just stick on a lanyard and go, I've got my white charger, I'm going to come in and save you, you poor people. And I guess that's kind of not really what it's about, really. But when you're talking about this thinking, I'm getting journey. Sometimes I hate that word in DE&I, by the way, but I'm getting the word journey coming through a lot. That this isn't kind of about going to bed one night when your company runs an allyship event and waking up the next morning having had the allyship fairy sprinkle the fairy dust in your ear that you can do this work really well and all the time. It's progressive is what I'm hearing.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I think we can progress to a slide that tells us a bit about it as well.
Yes, I've forgotten about this. This is a goodie. This is a goodie. Yeah. Can you talk us through what this looks like? Because this really does talk about that progression in quite some detail.
Sure. One thing I want to just to comment on your thinking piece there, Angie. I think what we
Mm.
need to be careful of is not to just stay in the thinking place and think thinking is going to be helpful for communities too. We want to be thoughtful. We want to be intentional. We want to be mindful of our impact, but we don't want to say, well, I'm just doing loads of thinking for the next year and a half.
Sitting here,
Done.
meditating on it.
No,
Yeah,
just want to make sure we're making some movements in action as well. But it's in terms of, we always talk about allyship being a journey of evolution. It's something that perhaps, there could be perhaps for all of us on this call, one particular community that perhaps have most affinity with, or perhaps just in a community that perhaps we have most understanding of.
Mm.
And that's perhaps our obvious place to start with allyship work. That's fantastic. But, we will find ourselves starting at various places. And I'll talk about the starting zone here. When we talk about the starting zone, are those individuals who are, I'm quite blunt, they're in a area or a feeling of fear around the whole idea of allyship. They're in denial a lot of the time. They're in denial that there's ever even a need for support. These are the individuals where they'll come out and say things like, well, if I haven't experienced this in my organization, then it's not happening. So
Yeah.
I haven't seen racism. I haven't heard those homophobic remarks. I think they're just all being a bit too sensitive. So I'm going to invalidate it. I'm going to push it down, and I'm going to ignore it. And you get a bunch of people within this zone who are perhaps very, very comfortable in their safety zones. They're very, very comfortable with the connections that they have had. They're very, very comfortable with the communities around them that buffer them, buffer their position, buffer their sense of privilege, and also perhaps don't challenge them to think about what that really means and what the implications are. So they're in a place where they're pushing back on the reality.
Can I hold you there for 1 second?
Sure,
I'm going to ask our audience out there just a question. Can you just give me yes or no, please, in the chat? Is anyone out there ever been in that zone? If you really look deeply into yourself and you look back on, your careers, has anyone ever been in a place where you're actually actively denying that discrimination is a problem to you, that you're not really going after those hard questions, that you're trying to be comfortable? Okay, I've got somebody saying no, they've never been there. That's interesting. I'd love to know more about that. I wish I could speak to you, but I'd love to know more about that. That's striving to sort of be comfortable. And yeah, I think the majority of people are saying, yeah, and that thing about I talk to others that think and look like me, that's quite a hard one to move out of, because that's where I feel comfortable and that's where I feel safe. Emma, don't worry. Yeah, thank you, Tim. Don't worry. I'm with you. So let's have a little look then. You move out of that starting zone into the learning zone. I'm going to come back to the starting zone in a sec, but Hannity, can you just talk us a bit more through that learning zone? Like, what is that all about?
Absolutely. First, I want to acknowledge the people in the chat that said that they were in the fear zone. It is quite courageous and vulnerable to say in front of, 100 people that we have been, but we all have been in that zone at some point. So thank you so much for being so courageous. The learning zone is a progression from the fear zone. And in the learning zone, this is where people understand that there is systemic racism, that the system actually advantages some people over others, and that they recognize their own privilege. They understand that they've been benefiting from that system in a way or another. They're comfortable with uncomfortableness, so they know that the way forward is for them to look introspectively. Look at how they have been taking advantage of the system, or how they sit very comfortably in their privilege without wanting to nudge. So basically understanding that there is a truth out there that they don't have access to, and they lean in for uncomfortable questions. They understand that they have biases, and they understand that others have been impacted by this. So they want to know more, they want to learn more. They may not have all the answers, so they sometimes do not know what to do not know what to say, but they know that they need to do something. This is the learning zone.
So it's majoring on curiosity. And if I can just push on two areas that are in there that I think are important, because one is personal vulnerability by the looks of that. So it's in a place where I am prepared to say, I don't know, but I know I have to find out. But the other place is systemic vulnerability, in that if you are for example, very senior person in the C-suite of an organization, to be an ally, I think what I am hearing you say is I absolutely have to acknowledge within myself that my organization is carrying systemic bias somewhere. And I have to be prepared for what comes from any work around that or investigation into that. Would that resonate? Am I right?
Absolutely. If they don't see the problem, they will not be able to fix the system or address how it's being disadvantaging people.
And I guess that's different at different levels in the organization, isn't it? If I can just sort of stay with that one, because I can imagine that individual contributors recognizing their own bias and recognizing what's going on from where their view is, and then moving on, and we'll get to that in a second, to the growth zone, is very different from somebody much more senior who can actually shape the mechanics of the organizational design and the systemic bias that's sitting in those areas. Have you seen that in the work that you've been doing, that difference in how people take to allyship and apply that?
Absolutely. So when people do have power, they can be change agent. They can be the person that takes this change and carries through from top to bottom. While when we talk about individual contributors, recognizing biases, building on those relationships, and speaking up on behalf of other people, or speaking up when people are not even present in that meeting. But the more hierarchy there is, the more power there is to actually do something about it. So with power comes privilege, and people in the organization need to know that if they don't see the problem, they can't even address it. So the first step is to recognize that there is a problem, and then doing something about it, looking at the structural level.
That's interesting. Can I put a question to both of you that we're getting in from Jen? And her big challenge is, so how, and we haven't even got to the growth zone yet, Jen, we'll do that in just a sec, but how do you get people out of that starting zone and into the learning zone? I mean, I suppose we would all say you run a training course, but I mean, what actually do you do to ignite that interest of movement from the one to the other? What can you do?
Go ahead, Annie. Go ahead.
No, you go first, Alice.
I don't mind. Don't fight over it.
I feel before you get to the point of official interventions, there needs to be some commentary around deep humility within any organization. That has to be role modeled and demonstrated by senior leaders to see it's actually okay to do what many of the participants here today just said in the chat. Like, no, I have been there. I had been in a place of denial before, and start talking about that, normalizing that as a reality, and to making it a bit of a psychologically safe space to admit that this is this place that you're in. Before you start introducing formalized training or mentoring, reverse mentoring programs, you got to start there with the culture and making it an okay place to admit that this is where you are. And that starts with leadership talking about it and doing it themselves first.
I want to add that if there is great resistance in the fear zone or the starting zone, I would say going back to that culture, establishing a positive culture in which people feel that there is a positive change happening outside. This work cannot be shoved down people's throats. They need to be invited to jump in. They need to lean in. So sometimes just establishing that positive culture will get people to open up, just open up about a different way of seeing things, a different way of experiencing the workplace.
And just to add on to that, Nadia, I think a really, really good point you've made there. Because I think what's really important is to actually, A, not throw it down folks' throats, but B, on that journey towards humility, being empathetic towards those folks who are in the starting or fear zone. Angie, you spoke about the diversity fatigue or diversity backlash that we're seeing more and more, and we have to understand, well, where is that coming from? Like, why do you have that resistance? Where is that fear coming from? Because it could be something really, really legitimate. People have the perception that their control or power that they've had for a very long time is going.
It's on the move.
And for many of us on the call, we will rightly think to ourselves, well, good, because we're seeing people from previously underrepresented or served groups getting opportunities. But the same breath, you got people thinking, okay, yeah, but the opportunity that I thought was mine, and rightly or wrongly they thought that way, is going. Okay, and we have to sit with that and understand, well, that's a legitimate and valid feeling that you've got, but let's prove to you the positive case, to your point, Hannadi, as to why there's actually opening up far more opportunities. We have to sit there with a population who perhaps is feeling vilified or othered within this conversation and sit with them to bring them with us. Otherwise, we're not going to have an effective health community.
And I think it's probably worth sharing just before we move on to that growth zone part. And I do think this is a very relevant conversation for allyship, because it isn't all ha ha he he, let's do it. The recent stat that came out was 62% of the privileged group in organisations, I can only go the UK and the US on this, actually believed that they would be overlooked for their next promotion in favour of a diverse candidate. Now, you know, if I'm talking to my American colleagues, then that's like asking turkeys to vote for Thanksgiving, or, you know, turkeys to vote for Christmas, really, isn't it? And you know, we have to say, if they are feeling like that and we jump on board with, whoa, allyship, we've got to get them to a place first before they can jump in even to the starting zone, let alone to the learning zone. I'm just getting a couple of comments for, and I promise we will move to that growth zone. Natasha says she works in a global organisation focused on public health in Asia and Africa, and she's found that around DEI there are different views about why it's important. In fact, people see it as a US viewpoint. Oh, hang on, she skips away from me. Oh, the fact that people see it as a US, no, I've lost her completely. Oh gosh, that was going to be a really good one.
Being imposed on them.
Imposed onto them.
Thank you. Really interesting one. Yeah, I absolutely would absolutely concur and agree with that. And what Ken's saying, explaining why it's needed and the benefits of allyship and diversity can be helpful. You'd think it'd be obvious. Oh, Ken, you would think it would be obvious, but the number of senior teams I work with, and I think I am really going back to ABC here. And you know, you never get that impression when you're briefed before you go in. Apparently they all know everything, until you ask them to define things like diversity and find out they can't. It's quite interesting. Now on to the growth zone, because the growth zones, you know, I'm going to get excited about the growth zone. I like to see a bit of action. What's happening in the growth zone? How, like, what's going on there? What's going on there, and how do we get from the learning zone to the growth zone?
Alistair, do you want to do that?
Sure. It's a combination of practice makes perfect in a way. You know, I think what you see people being very fearful around in the learning zone is, oh, I don't want to say anything in case I get it wrong, or I don't want to offend people. I don't want to earn a reputation for myself of being, I don't know, confrontational or belligerent by always coming up with these, you know, remarks or these comments and things. But actually, the whole thing about moving into the growth zone is actually you are committed to thinking to yourself, well, actually, me being an ally, me being a known, consistent supporter of a particular community, well, actually, you know what? To coin a phrase, that is part of my corporate brand. That's who I am as an individual within this organization. It's what I stand for. It is what I believe to be true. And if that in that work, that means you may put your foot in it sometimes. You may be on the receiving end of feedback from the community you're serving to say, you know what, I didn't actually need your support within that moment, or what you said there was a bit misinformed. Let me give you some more information as to why it was misinformed. That's okay. That's part of this. It's learning, it's growing, it's moving through.
Part of the going on.
Absolutely.
Hannah, lovely. Thank you, Hannah.
And so one important note here, it's important to assess where you are, but it's also important to get a sense of how people perceive you as well. So you may perceive yourself in the growth zone while you are in the learning zone, and that could be problematic because you might be thinking, you know, high of yourself when you can actually do more, or be perceived in the learning zone while you are in the growth zone. And these tends to be the people that are harsh on themselves. They always see that there is more that they can do, which is great, but we need to do it in a positive light. So always seek feedback from people on how they perceive you in terms of their allyship.
And I've got a really good one from Emma here, and I've kind of what I was going to say. So how do we measure where we are? Like, what are some of the how am I going to know where I am sitting? I think, and the other thing to say, certainly for me, there are some groups that I would say I am in the growth zone with, because I know my stuff, right? I know it really, really well. There are other groups that I'm definitely in the learning zone with. I discover more and new stuff each day, and I don't feel 100% confident of going out and having those conversations. So how do I know? Like, is it just self-judged, or, going back to what Hannity said, how do others perceive you? So what's the truth? How am I going to find that out?
So if we ask ourselves, if you see on the chart here, if you ask yourself, do I recognize that discrimination is a present and current problem? Rate yourself on 1 to 5. How much do you know about this?
Good idea.
So 1 being poor, 5 being high. And then going through these questions and rate yourself, see where you can learn more or what you can do more. I'd say that's a start.
So it's actually using these to measure. That's a good idea, Alistair. Sorry.
I see it as any kind of competency framework as which you underpin what an ally really is for an organization.
Yeah.
And I've actually seen it work in a couple of firms that we work with, where they formalized the role of what an ally is, broadly speaking, and created a job description of what it is. And then off the back of the job description, there are a set of competencies through which you can start pinning some of these descriptors underneath and leveling it to see where you might be on these particular zones. And then you could measure it from self-reflections or self-report, but also you could do a 360 style survey, perhaps with the employee resource group that's representative of the community you're supporting, or with individuals who've seen you do it.
So making it a lot more formalized than people
way.
might have thought. Because again, I talk to an awful lot of clients and potential clients that are actually quite surprised that it's more than just, oh yeah, go and run a 2-hour training course and everyone will magically be an ally. That it is that formality and that sort of building stuff up. Orla's giving us a wonderful comment. So this is super, but will you have access to a recording of the session? Yes, you will, Orla. So yes, Kim is in the background merrily recording us. So you will. So don't put your brain on. Don't worry about writing notes. You'll be able to get hold of that. I've got one more comment in chat. And do we ever get to be in the growth zone and stay there? So if I can give you an example, I would have considered up until the last year that I was firmly in the growth zone around LGBTQI. I just would have said to you, firmly in the growth zone. But new stuff, new ways of thinking, new ideas have kind of put me back to the learning zone. So I'm not confident. I'm not as confident as I was. So is there any way that we end up in the growth zone going, right, that's it, I'm an ally for that group in this zone now, gonna stay here forever?
No.
I led you to that one, didn't I? No.
I think perhaps I think this model, perhaps it's very simple to get a narrative going and to see a bit of a visual. Yeah. There are nuances, of course. I think what the difference is between the learning and the growth is a lot of doing as opposed to a lot of listening and researching. I think that's what's really critical here. So even Angie, in your example, when maybe in the last year there's some revelations that are new to you, but actually in those moments where you need to be a listening ear for someone, where you need to perhaps correct someone on the misuse of pronouns, I'm sure you would still have that conversation. You would still, even with all of the knowledge that you've got, so do it. So actually there's a pivot between learning and growth here. As much as you're learning with the new things that are coming through, you're still taking action as well.
And I don't know, Alistair, if you agree with that, but I think also in the allyship journey, the more you know, the less you know, the more you realize that there is more that you didn't know. And it's just a continuous learning journey.
Yeah. And I would also, sorry, go on.
I always come back to this humility thing. I think it's really important to say, you know what, it's okay that I'm still learning these things. I am not the gift to this, even though we've all been working in this space for years. We do it day in, day out, and it'll be remiss of me, of you, of Nadia, to say that we know it all, because we don't. But we're just talking about it. We're doing. And I think the important thing is we're doing is really important.
Yeah. And I think let's put on top of that I think it's the knowledge, but it's also acknowledging the bias might creep back in. So if I go back to LGBT, my LGBTQI+, when a new letter appears in that acronym, I can feel myself going, oh, for God's sake, no. Straight back to the starting zone, right? Because again, I can't be a true advocate if I am judging the need of another human being to be recognized in that way. Yeah, so I think it's a combination, but there are so many different ways though to be an ally. I mean, I think this is the other thing that kind of blows your mind. You know, when we said at the beginning, you know, what is an ally? There were people saying support, there were people saying you know, advocate and step in. So can you talk a little bit more to, I think we have a slide to share, the different kind of ways that we can be an ally, because there is not just one, is there?
No, there's 5, but actually there's a lot more than 5. So I'll talk about the first 2, and then Alistair can take it away. The cheerleader. So the cheerleader, the amplifier, the researcher, the intervener, and the supporter. And these are just indications of behaviors that people can take on in different situations. The cheerleader being the visible advocate, somebody who is very well aware of their own privilege and power, and is using that privilege and power to you know, encourage and reinforce the points of views and the voices of people from underrepresented minorities. So what does this look like in the workplace? It could be nominating somebody who may be overlooked for a promotion to be promoted, or nominating somebody from an underrepresented minority for a high potential project. This is the cheerleader. The amplifier, just exactly as you see that stereo icon on that, basically somebody who hears, who is in tune, who is listening deeply to the voices of minorities and is amplifying them. So if you are in a meeting and somebody suggests something that goes unnoticed, and then it's picked up by somebody with a louder voice, so you being the amplifier in that moment is picking up on what that person said, and then crediting the idea to the person who originally suggested that. This is the amplifier. In a digital world, this is forwarding you know, posts from somebody who's expressing anger or expressing pain into your own network. It could be multiple forms, but this is the amplifier.
So you could be an introvert amplifier, because I know a lot of the time, if if we assume that allyship is standing on the table saying stop it, stop it, stop it, and intervening, we imagine that intervention to be quite powerful and physical almost, and in the moment. What you're saying is it is very possible for anyone, even with those fears, to be an amplifier by the things you're talking about, the amplifying the messages on social media and the emails that come through. So I really like that. I really like that. Amelia, I will come back and try and answer your question before the end, I promise. So that's the first 2. They're the 2 that sound noisy to me. Alistair.
We're going to get reflective in the next one. Actually, a bit quieter. So I guess the researcher is very much about doing your homework on the community that you are thinking about advocating or supporting. It is going out there and accessing literature. It is watching relevant TED Talks. It is following notable commentators on your social medias, your LinkedIn, Twitter, your Instagram, people who perhaps can educate on the various lived experiences. Where I found out about that royal story that I mentioned earlier was actually following a commentator on an Instagram who I follow every day, and they were posting and talking about it. I wouldn't have known about that as readily if not followed that person.
That's curious.
Yeah, one thing I think is really, really critical about this is what we always say when it comes to being a researcher is not running after a training session, or you've seen that thing on Instagram, running to the first Black, gay, neurodiverse, female person that you know in the office and get them to download everything there is that they need to know, you need to know about their discrimination at work. Don't do that, because they're probably just sat there writing an email or finishing up a spreadsheet, and then you've come really well intentioned, but come to ask them to relive some trauma, some hurt, some pain. Like, it's really difficult for them to really educate and share with you in that moment. So instead, first and foremost, access the forums that are relevant for that kind of sharing within the organization. You've got resource groups galore, or intranet resources available to you to educate you on communities. Many organizations do have that resource available to you. Or invite that person to come for a coffee, create the space and the environment where it's appropriate to have a conversation. But instead of getting that person to divulge everything about their experience, come to them with some curious questions based on the reading that you have done, or even some suggestions for action as well. Be active, be diligent, be intentional in terms of the action you're taking. The intervener, that's a behavior that perhaps many of us think about immediately when we think about being an ally.
Completely.
It is having those robust, direct conversations, but this can show up in one of two very different ways. The first is, I'm going to coin a term here, the whole calling out behavior, where you're being direct, you're seeing the comment, the behavior, the decision that's undermining particular communities in the moment. And in that moment, you're having that direct conversation. You're shutting it down because you know it's causing harm or pain in the immediate vicinity in which the behavior is taking place. Many of us, and I'll include myself here, perhaps recoil in horror at the thought of doing that, because it's conflict driven, it's going to receive perhaps a defensive response in the person, and particularly if we are managing up and we're giving that feedback to someone higher in the hierarchy, it can feel really difficult, really exposing. So the other intervention behavior is calling in. No, it's having a educational, considerate, calm conversation with someone, giving feedback on what you have seen. And that kind of happens after the event has taken place.
So not at that moment, not
in that moment.
So what do I do with the bit of me that wants to protect you?
Well, in terms of protecting myself, really, what I want to make sure you do is make sure you go away and think about what message you want to send that person. You give that other person a moment just to really recalibrate, and you come with your considered thoughts in a safer, curious conversation where that person isn't being blamed. It's about growth. It's about facilitating that person's thinking and seeing their impact in a way that perhaps is just gently prodding them, rather than completely coming with a sledgehammer in the calling out conversation.
I get it. So basically, I've got to deal with the feeling inside me that says, I want to do this. This is important. I want to intervene. I want to intervene now. I've got to hold that bit back.
If that's in your style and you're comfortable doing that and you think it's appropriate given that forum, yeah, go for it. If you think you've also got the resource and the content to have that robust discussion, but many of us don't have that presence of mind in that moment. How many of us have walked away thinking, "Oh goodness me, I wish I said this, and this in that conversation," and didn't. And the calling in conversation gives us that time to
afterwards
come up with that repertoire.
So I guess there's two ways.
I can see Nadi's mouth going, wanting to come in.
Go on,
No. I just felt that this is a great place where we can talk about a white savior concept.
Yeah,
so
great.
I want to give you the mic to do that.
I think certainly many of us can think to ourselves that we want to do good. We want to come in, and we want to be seen to be taking action, but we have to be mindful of the intent behind why we're doing it in the first place. And the whole white saviorism concept really is, I'm going in perhaps ultimately either to make myself look good because my peers relate allyship as something positive, as something that should be done, and actively not really effectively supporting the community that we're trying to lift up and advantage and to make change for. And instead, we're just there for optics. We're there because our intent is to be seen to being positive. And it's quite
So
shallow.
am I centering myself here, basically?
It's
Am I at the
centering around
center of
myself
this?
and my benefit. Really, very eloquently put.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And can I move us on to the last one? I was quite excited about the intervener. Can I move us on to the last one?
So the supporter. One thing I want to say around the supportive behavior, which I think is really, really important, the communities that we are trying to lift up, whether it's your Black colleagues, your Muslim colleagues, your colleagues who are visibly or hiddenly disabled, people from an LGBT plus community, they are doing good. Now, these communities are strong, they are thriving in many ways, they are able to fight their battles. So I don't want, this is not about infantilizing communities or making them feel as if they need the support of all people. Instead, this behavior is about creating space to allowing those folks, if they need to be heard, if they need space for a bit of empathy, if they need space just to be understood and validated by communities that can ultimately use their privilege to support to help them, then this is what this behavior is all about. It's not about saying, oh, poor you, we need to help you, isn't it awful? It's actually saying, you know what, we're going to hold space for you, listen to you, affirm and validate you within this behavior. And it might just be someone's feeling a bit upset, a bit vulnerable, a bit emotional, and we're going to make sure that space is available for them to have that conversation with us.
And I'm guessing, looking at this, any one situation, you could cut across all of these. You know, I could have that sort of very supportive conversation and then make the decision to be an intervener, or decide I'm actually not going to take on the individual that maybe has upset them, but I am going to be an amplifier and take their voice. Am I right that you kind of whiz between these? I like this because it's really clear in the head of somebody like me that you have a choice. You don't have to just go and react. That was really, really useful. Thank you. Can I ask a question though? Because it's good for someone like me because you can think it through. But I have to ask the question, why on earth do we not do this as human beings naturally? Why is everyone not? Why do companies like PDT Global have to run allyship programs and have these conversations and come up with these models? Surely, as humans, we want to do this just naturally. I tell you what, actually, I'm going to do two questions before I may.
Okay.
First question for you out there in chat. When you look at those 5, are there any that feel easier for you and your personality, not necessarily the situation, but your personality to go for? Which ones? Can I hear from you in chat, please? Which of those 5 do you think you'd go, yeah, that's my natural place to be? That's what I would be comfortable doing. Can I hear from folks in chat? I've got supporter.
As people are typing in, Angie, one of the things that people can also know is that in different situations, they use different behaviors.
Of course.
It doesn't have to be one specific behavior,
Yeah.
or they start with being the supporter and then move into the amplifier or intervener.
No, that's interesting. Thank you, Anady. And I think, you know, again, it's just sort of really getting that piece, because I want to bring us on to sort of talking about, you know, and you know, people are quite clear there. You know, there's loads that people say, yeah, absolutely, you can, if when you're in your thinking mind, you can choose between. But I'm interested in, you know, what would people naturally align to? What they would go for? So yeah,
I also
absolutely.
perhaps think these behaviors are linked to where they are on their journeys as well. Some people might feel more comfortable being the researcher because that's where I am right now. I can go away and find out more information. Or you know what, I might not know everything, but I do feel myself as a bit of an empath, so I can be a supporter as well. And I can hold space and really think about that for somebody else and try to understand. So, or I'm pretty senior, so I can be the cheerleader. Actually, you know what? You know, I can actually advocate and promote the competencies and skills. Actually, I think you can matrix these behaviors in a variety of ways. whether
Got it.
it's in your learning journey pathway, whether it's in your level of
Yes.
seniority in your organization
Yeah.
too.
So what I'm getting it is about where you're comfortable, where your personality might take you. It's then about the situation. Sorry,
Mm.
Hannah, as you go.
You said what I'm comfortable with, but we always invite people to step outside that comfort zone and
Yes.
take on a behavior that's not natural to them, that doesn't sound so
Completely.
comfortable to them,
Yeah.
to step up and flex those muscles as well.
So
One
there,
thing,
again, it comes back to that learning again, doesn't it? Sorry,
yeah.
Alistair.
One thing we have to make sure is that we don't use the excuse of discomfort to not do anything at all. You know,
Yeah.
because actually doing nothing in my book means you're being complicit in the harm and the oppression people are facing in themselves.
Well,
and actually
I'm
doing something is better than nothing at all.
going to push you on that though,
Oh
and
gosh,
take
here
us
we
on
go.
to our next level.
Yes.
So you're saying that doing
Yeah.
nothing is complicit, and for obvious reasons, I completely agree. But if I can just play advocate for a minute, why don't we do this naturally, then?
Oh gosh, there's so many reasons as to why not. I think
Fear
Well,
is
ask
a big
people
thing.
out there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fear. Being branded as a disruptor, fear of any personal, professional relationships being affected. For some people, it could be, you know what? I've actually been receiving kind of discrimination and bias in my life, and it actually feels really difficult to engage in this work because it brings up some emotions for me
Yeah.
based on. But then that could be argued as centering yourself around it and not the other community that you're facing. Detrimental to your brand. Absolutely, it could be.
And
Handy, what are your thoughts?
part of it is also not knowing what to do
Yeah.
or making things worse. So just by not knowing what to do, we're going to escalate the situation so they don't do anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So again, that I guess is where that learning piece comes in. If we learn more, we get more confidence. Yeah, then that sort of piece of
And
not knowing what to do goes away.
we're actually coming back to the whole cultural conversation again. Is this a culture of blame or is this a culture of growth? And if it's a culture of growth, then engaging this behavior that is role modeled by our leaders, it shouldn't be something that is a bad thing to do. It should be something that you support, you can engage with. But unfortunately, in many other organizations that are out there, going to be quite general here, there is a culture of blame. There's a culture of hierarchy, and there's a culture of fear. You can't, we have a saying here in the United Kingdom, you can't raise your head above the parapet. You know, you can't just stick your neck out for people because that is out of kilter.
Sure. And I know that you've been doing some work recently, which and if folks out there are still with us and not thinking, oh my gosh, this is a bit complicated. It is complicated.
Yeah.
And I'm getting questions about how you put this into your organization. I'm sure someone will speak to you separately about that, Claudia, because that's what we do for a living. So we can certainly talk to you about that, but not here if you don't mind, but we will come back to you on it. The culture of blame, the culture of growth. I know you've been doing quite a lot of work around, it's not new, but it's not spoken about, allyship that is more holistic than the allyship that most of us are kind of talk about. So can I move us on to that for the last sort of 5 minutes, Alistair?
Yeah, it's a new thing that I've been really starting to push. I think I had a bit of a breakthrough in my own mind and thinking about this over the summer, really. And it's about making sure that we're not just thinking about and prioritizing those individuals from certain communities that we find palatable, sexy, okay to ally for. And I think about two communities that really come to mind. The first is the resurgence of Black Lives Matter and our Black colleagues. And we want to make sure that in that conversation that all Black Lives Matter. So we're not just talking about our Black colleagues who perhaps sound Caucasian, who are code switching, or our Black colleagues who come from middle class backgrounds or live in quote unquote good areas. Or, we're also talking about our Black colleagues or even anyone in society who are also disabled, who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who don't code switch, who perhaps we just don't have much positive opinion for, or even have opposite political affiliations to us. We want to make sure that we're being holistic and seeing the whole community. And Angie, you've mentioned the LGBTQ plus community and today. Within that community, it could be tempting to simply support the cis white men with their rippling abs and pecs at Pride. Great. But we're also talking about the femme gay men. We're talking about lesbians, bisexual people, people identifying as queer, our transgender friends and colleagues, our friends who are asexual. It's about making sure that we're being not only holistic, but also intersectional when it comes to our support for these communities, and not just seeing them as one monolith, and not just being superficial in supporting the individuals that we think are powerful to us.
Yeah. No, and again, it's a whole nother layer that I think is something that is unspoken. I mean, I know we talk about it on our allyship programs now. Thank you to Alistair. But it is not something I hear generally spoken of when people talk about it elsewhere. So I think that is really, really important. I have in the last couple of minutes also a question, and somebody sent me a question privately, and I just want to bring this up. On a more practical level, running allyship programs across an organization. We recently had 2 very large allyship programs running with 2 different clients. One of those clients had run inclusive leadership programs, and they made allyship the next step, but it was optional, so it wasn't compulsory. That kind of made sense to us. They did run at 85% uptake, which I thought was fantastic. But we had another client who has also run an allyship program, but they made it compulsory, and they also made it part of the psychological contract of being in the organization that you would stand as an ally to a group that was not your own, and you would do proper allyship work, the like of which we've seen over a year-long period. And they are basically putting that in, that sort of compulsory, not compulsory. In the last couple of minutes that we've got, Hannity, can I ask, what's your thoughts on both of those?
I think there is benefit in both concepts. I do believe that if people are forced to attend something that they're not ready for, they will not make the most of it. It's just a waste of resources and time. But I also feel that when there is a general conversation in the company, if allyship is a conversation that's happening in all the time, people are talking about their learnings, there is space for growth for people who are resistant. So there are advantages for compulsory and non-compulsory, but what's important is to really ground the work with conversations around biases, around identities, around discrimination, and everything that comes before allyship.
Yeah, so really doing that groundwork and before you make that happen. Yeah, I could agree more. I think, if ever we are asked, can we just do an allyship program, and an organization hasn't even started along doing its foundational work, I do think you can do it straight after a bit of foundational work. I don't think it's not the advanced course of inclusion, which somebody asked me the other week. But I do think that sort of baseline has to be established. But and I do agree with that. Alistair, can I turn to you for just a final thought for folks to take away on allyship generally? What can they do? What can the people out there? What do you want them thinking about?
Gosh, I think for people who are starting out, the first thing I want just to say quite simply is pick up a book and read about people you don't know about. First and foremost, very simply, there's a vast way of resources out there, pretty practical. It's Christmas time right now. Be an ally and give people books about identities to others, or it's holiday season for folks to do that. I also think we've got to be really, really clear about what the future of this work is and what it's looking like for us right now. It's holding particularly our leaders more accountable in emulating and displaying this work. It's also making sure through formalized structure of allyship that we're not just making change to attitude, but also making change in terms of structure and the systems and the processes that we have in place for these individuals. And I wrote down a couple of things: is be authentic, be loud, be consistent, and be visible.
I like all of those. I am just going to have to, at this point, call us to a close. I want to thank everybody out there for coming along today. I want to thank the wonderful Kim Hare for helping us and producing for us. I want to say to all of you, we would love to talk to you more. We love talking about this, as you probably have gathered. We will be sending a recording. We will be sending the slides along. Please do reach out to us on any medium that you would like to. We're all on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. We'll look forward to hearing from you again. For now, Alistair, Hannity, thank you so much. Thank you for all your questions. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Angela. I just want to thank you for a great discussion today. And everybody joining us, please be sure to visit GP Strategy's website for any of our future sessions. And I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Take care.
This webinar is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can access more webinars or download additional resources at gpstrategies.com/resource-library.